Last Friday, I went to a funeral with my mom and my aunt. We were going to a service for my great uncle. The funeral was in Shawnee, Oklahoma. Now, Shawnee, Oklahoma is east of Oklahoma City, for those who may not know. Very small town. The most popular thing there is something called the Shawnee Mills. Now, I can remember as a kid growing up, we would go and visit there, and we would always go to my mom and my aunt's home church. That's where the entire Leatherman clan went to church. And right across the street from that church was where my aunt lived. So we would always go visit my aunt there. And all of that is right next to the Shawnee Mills. This time going to Shawnee, we were driving through and something felt different. And I started to chew. If you know Andre, you know that I often talk about living in two Americas. As a black man in America, yes, we have privilege different from other countries outside of the States. But as a black man living in America, I also understand that my America looks different from other people. And so we call it living in two different Americas, where on one hand, I get the opportunity to walk around, to live in an America, home of the free, land of the brave, all of that good stuff. At the same time, as a black man living in America, I automatically know that I am going to be profiled if I go to the store. I know that people are going to look at me different. I know that I've got to be safe black. So they don't think that I'm an aggressive, angry black man. I understand this. This is just the two Americas in which I live. I know that if I were to go to a bank and try to get a small business loan, historically speaking, that never happened for blacks. I understand that being in the black side or on the black side of the town, you don't get the same love and the same ideas and the same resources and the same funding as white sides of town. And after the funeral, we were going to go visit one of my other great aunts. So before going there, I said, if you don't mind, can you just show me how life lived in Shawnee? And they did. And I'll never be the same again. You see, Shawnee was just like any other town in Oklahoma, any other town in the United States. And there was a black side of town and a white side of town. And as we were driving through Shawnee, you could see all the historical buildings from Shawnee. You could tell the white part of town. It looked nostalgic. It looked just like the show The Wonder Years. You could clearly tell that this town was built with great bricks, great everything. And it had that feeling. It had that Route 66 feeling. It had that Cars type of feeling. That Andy Griffith type of feeling. Like you could understand and feel the nostalgia, the old age, the old era, the let's make America great again type of feeling driving through Shawnee and that part of town. And while driving through that part of town, my aunt and my mom gave me stories of where Poppy, my grandfather, would work and shine shoes. Where my grandmother, we called her Granny, where she worked at Sears. As we drove through the town, they showed me where their segregated schools were. My mom even talked about the time that she wanted to learn how to swim. And so my grandfather, Poppy, took her to the swim spot where everybody swam and said, my daughter wants lessons. How much are lessons? And they wouldn't give her lessons initially because the lessons were only for white people. So my grandfather, being very consistent, asking and persistent, saying, my daughter wants swimming lessons. So what did they do? They had her being by herself, having her own swim lessons, because you know black kids and white kids can't swim in the same pool. So they allowed the white kids to have their swim lessons first. They all got out of the pool. They all walked away. Then they had my mom having those lessons. During that time, all of the black kids walked all over the city. And so in order to get from the black side of the town to the white side of the town, you had to cross under this bridge.
See that bridge? We'd all be in a group. And when we get to that bridge, you have to run up on it because they would always tell us it was a white man on top of the bridge waiting to kill black people. But they didn't always black people.
Yes, you heard that right. There was a bridge in Shawnee that every black kid, when they went under that bridge to get to the white side of the town, they would take off sprinting to get past. Why? Because there was a story that there was a white man on top of that bridge with a gun ready to shoot people. Now, of course, it sounds like urban legend, but believe it or not, there was some truth to this. The story is, back in the day, during these segregated times, a lot of the whites in that community, in that area, hated that the blacks had to walk to their side of the town. And they all knew that they walked by that bridge or under that bridge to get to those schools, to get to the shopping centers, to get to the theater, to get to all of the place of the downtown area of Shawnee. And so there were actually people up there on that bridge with guns to intimidate and to scare the black people in that area. Ain't that some mess? Imagine with me, a 7-year-old kid, 8-year-old kid that have to walk to school and they've got to go under this bridge and they're scared to death. And as soon as they would see that bridge, they would take off running. It's a dang shame. Two Americas. Of course, over the years, desegregation happens. By law, you had your blacks and your whites coming together. My mom said that she was in the 9th grade when it happened. And so she went to the Shawnee High School and it was desegregated. That doesn't mean that she still wasn't being called a nigger here and there and everywhere. But by law, it was desegregated. What I found most shocking was all my life, I have heard of the other side of the tracks, where one side of the neighborhood or one side of the community was phenomenal, but as soon as you cross the tracks on the other side, you can see those same resources were not there. And in Shawnee, right at the Shawnee Mills, I saw it for myself. Literally the other side of the tracks.
The other side of the tracks, right?
Post this on Facebook.
And they would have trains that came back and forth.
Yeah, trains
with
came.
grain in them and stuff.
Yeah, we knew how to watch for trains.
Literally the other side of the tracks. Wow. Oh, this is amazing. Sorry, we got a bump. Mess up all of the car.
We used to it.
Mess up the car, mess up everything. Wow. Now we're on the white side of town.
Yep, just like that.
And then the more and more that I drove around that area and they were telling me where everybody was, like, oh, that's where our 1st grade teacher was. That's where our 3rd grade teacher. That's where the music teacher was. Oh, that's where the banker was. Like, my mom and my aunt remembered all of the details of who lived where in the area. And as we drove around the neighborhood, I quickly realized how close of the community it was. You see, the black people didn't have a whole lot of space. It was maybe 5 or 6 blocks, maybe 5 or 6 blocks total of Shawnee. And that was it. All of the rest of Shawnee was white, except for this one small area. So now I understand why the community was such a tight-knit community. If you only live in 4 or 5 blocks long and you have to walk everywhere, you are seeing everybody's parent all the time. You are seeing everybody's kids all the time. If you are an 8th grader or 9th grader and you see some 2nd graders running, you are going to try to protect those babies. I get it now. I understand why people were looking out for each other. Because if you are in that small little section, anybody who comes to that neighborhood, you've got your eye on, especially a segregated area. So yes, the community became really tight-knit. Yes, if you got in trouble on one block, you probably got a spanking there, and then by the time you got home, you got another spanking. I get it now, because the tiny blocks were so community-driven and so close, You couldn't help but to know everybody. You couldn't help but to love on everybody. You couldn't help but to serve everybody. And that goes back to our two Americas. On one side of the train tracks, you had all these resources, all of this privilege to do whatever you wanted to do, when you wanted to do it, and how you wanted to do it. But as soon as you crossed over the Shawnee Mills train tracks, you saw a different America. And the more and more I think about it, there are two Americas all over our nation. Two different thoughts. The people who lived on the rich side of Shawnee, they never had to experience what it felt like on the other side of the tracks. The people on the other side of the tracks never ever had to feel what it felt like to be treated as equal on the rich side of town. The two Americas. And in today, it's the exact same thing. So many of us are living in a different America from which you grew up. And in order for our country to heal, it starts with empathy. It starts with understanding and realizing that your way of living and your way that you were raised and the way in which you live could perhaps be different from other people. It's two Americas. What are we going to do about it? Chew on this.